Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The snow came down hard in the high plains of Wyoming, driven sideways by a wind that showed no mercy. Out there, winter didn't just test strength, it judged it. Across a frozen stretch of land, a German shepherd moved forward through the storm. Her coat was thick but soaked through, her legs shaking with every step. In her mouth, she carried a puppy so small it barely weighed more than a promise. Behind her, several others struggled to follow, disappearing and reappearing in the blowing snow like ghosts trying to stay tethered to the living. She was a mother, and she was running out of time. Her paws sank deep with each stride. Ice clung to her underbelly. The wind clawed at her face, but she did not stop. She could not. Somewhere ahead, through the white curtain of the storm, she had seen a light, a single golden glow against the dark. It was faint. It might have been a dream, but it was all she had. So she carried on. One step, then another. Her breath came in short, desperate bursts. The puppy in her mouth was silent now, its tiny body limp and cold. She adjusted her grip, careful not to hurt it, and pushed forward. Behind her, the other pups whimpered and stumbled. One fell. She stopped, set down the puppy she carried, and nudged the fallen one back to its feet with her nose. Then she picked up the first again and kept moving. She did not know how far she had come. She did not know how much farther she could go. But mothers do not stop until there is nothing left. Miles away, an old ranch house stood alone against the white horizon. Inside, Frank Donovan sat near a wood stove that cracked and hissed as it fought the cold. The fire threw shadows across the walls, making the empty rooms feel even larger. His hands were wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, one his wife had bought at a roadside stand 30 years ago. The coffee inside had gone cold an hour ago, but he still held it. Those hands had once been steady. They had carried M16 rifles through the jungles of Vietnam. They had lifted wounded men onto helicopters while bullets tore through the air. They had folded the flag at his best friend's funeral, then at his wife's years later. Strong hands, reliable hands. Now they mostly trembled. Frank was 72 years old. His back was bent from decades of hard work. His knees ached when the weather turned. His hair, what was left of it, had gone the color of old snow. He had served his country when it asked, and kept serving long after it stopped asking. 2 tours, a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer, a lifetime of memories he couldn't put down. The army had taken his youth, his closest friends, and eventually, in a way he couldn't quite explain, his family. When his wife Caroline passed 3 years ago, the house grew quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. There were no children, no grandchildren running through the halls, no voices calling his name, just the wind, and the fire, and the long, cold nights. Frank stared into the stove. The flames danced and twisted, and for a moment he thought of the men he lost, young faces frozen in time, boys who never got the chance to grow old, to sit by a fire, to feel their hands shake with age instead of fear. He wondered sometimes why he had been allowed to stay, what purpose was left. The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows. It always did this time of year. Frank had learned to ignore it, but tonight something was different. A sound, faint, beneath the howl of the storm. Scratching. Slow, weak, deliberate. Frank's head turned sharply toward the front door. At first, he imagined it. The mind plays tricks when you're alone too long. But then it came again, a soft scraping sound, like something clawing at the wood. Frank set down his mug. His heart, old and worn as it was, began to beat harder. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and reached for his coat. The cold hit him the moment he moved away from the fire. He pulled the heavy fabric over his shoulders, his fingers fumbling with the zipper. Then he walked to the door. For a moment, he hesitated. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, visitors didn't just arrive, especially not in a storm like this. But the scratching came again. Frank turned the handle and pulled the door open. The storm rushed in like a living thing. Snow, wind, cold, so sharp it stole his breath. He squinted against it, raising one hand to shield his face. And there she stood, a German shepherd, her dark eyes locked on his. Snow clung to her fur in thick clumps. Her sides heaved with exhaustion. In her mouth, she held a puppy, so small, so still, it looked like it might already be gone. Behind her, shapes moved in the white, more puppies, struggling to stay upright, their tiny bodies shaking violently in the cold. The dog didn't bark, she didn't whine, she simply looked at him. And in that look, Frank saw something he hadn't seen in years. Trust, desperation, hope. His chest tightened, his throat went dry. He had seen that look before, on the faces of young soldiers trying not to show fear, on men who knew that help was their last chance, on boys far from home, clinging to life by a thread. Frank dropped to one knee, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through his leg. "Easy now," he said, his voice cracked and rough from disuse. "You're safe." The dog hesitated. Her eyes searched his face, reading him the way only animals can. Then, slowly, she stepped inside. She walked past him with careful, measured steps and laid the puppy gently on the floor near the fire. The small body barely moved. Steam rose from its wet fur. Frank started to close the door, but the dog turned sharply and pushed past him, back into the storm. "Wait!" Frank called out. But she was gone. He stood there, frozen, not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. She came back. 2 minutes later, she emerged from the white, another puppy in her mouth. She laid it beside the first, then turned and disappeared again. Frank's hands shook as he knelt beside the fire. Again she returned, and again. Each trip took longer. Her legs trembled harder. Her breathing grew shallow and ragged. Ice had formed on her muzzle. Her eyes were glazed with exhaustion. But she did not stop. Not until every puppy lay by the fire. 5 in total. When she finally stumbled inside with the last one, Frank caught her before she fell. She was heavier than he expected, solid muscle beneath the soaked fur. He guided her gently to the floor beside her pups, and she collapsed with a deep, shuddering breath. Frank closed the door. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in years, the house felt alive. That night, Frank didn't sleep. He moved slowly, carefully, the way a man does when he knows every action matters. He found old towels in the linen closet and dried each puppy one by one, rubbing warmth back into their tiny bodies. Their eyes were still closed, their paws were no bigger than his thumb. He warmed milk on the stove, diluted it with water, and fed them with a dropper he'd once used for medicine. His hands shook so badly he almost spilled it, but he steadied himself. One puppy at a time. Patience, precision. The mother watched him closely. Her dark eyes followed every movement, not with suspicion, not with fear, with something closer to understanding. At one point, deep in the night, Frank paused. He looked at her, this brave, exhausted creature who had given everything to save her young. "You remind me of the bravest people I ever knew," he whispered. She rested her head on the floor, her breathing finally steady. Frank added another log to the fire and sat back in his chair. The warmth settled over the room. The puppies made soft sounds, little squeaks and sighs, the kind of sounds that remind you life is fragile but stubborn. For the first time in 3 years, Frank smiled. 3 days passed. The storm broke. The sun returned, pale and cold, casting long shadows across the snow-covered plains. The puppies grew stronger. They began to wriggle and cry for milk. The mother ate the food Frank gave her, canned stew, scrambled eggs, anything he could find. She stayed close to her pups, watching over them with fierce, unblinking attention. But one morning, Frank noticed something wrong. The smallest puppy, a little female with a white patch on her chest, had stopped moving. Her breathing was shallow. Her body was cold. The mother picked her up gently in her mouth and carried her across the room. She laid the puppy at Frank's feet, then stepped back and sat down. She looked at him, and Frank understood. His vision blurred, his throat closed. That simple act, trusting him with her weakest, her most vulnerable, broke something open inside him that he'd kept locked away for years. He knelt down and picked up the tiny body. It was so light, so fragile. "I've got her," he said, his voice breaking. "I've got her." He called the vet in town, a woman named Dr. Ellis, who had been kind to him after Caroline died. She talked him through it over the phone, how to warm the puppy, how to stimulate her breathing, how to keep her alive until he could get there. Frank wrapped the puppy in a towel and held her against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, faint, irregular, but there. He drove through icy roads, white-knuckling the wheel, refusing to let go. At the clinic, Dr. Ellis worked quickly. Oxygen, warmth, IV fluids. Frank stayed. All night he sat in that sterile room, holding the puppy in his hands, whispering to her like she could hear him. "Come on, little one. You've got your mama waiting. You've got a life to live. Don't give up." By morning, the puppy took a breath on her own, then another. Frank bowed his head and cried, not for the war, not for the friends he'd lost, not for Caroline, but because something good had found him when he least expected it, because he had been needed, and he had not failed. Spring came to Wyoming the way it always did, slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether winter was truly gone. The snow melted, green returned to the fields, the sky opened up, wide and blue. The puppies grew strong and healthy. One by one, Frank found them homes, ranch families, neighbors, people he trusted. Each time one left, he felt a small ache, but he also felt something else: pride. One dog remained, the mother. Frank had tried at first to find her a home too, but every time someone came to meet her, she would sit beside him and look up at his face, and Frank would feel his resolve crumble. "I think she's already home," Dr. Ellis said one afternoon, smiling. Frank looked down at the dog. She looked back. He named her Liberty. Now, on quiet mornings, Frank and Liberty sit on the porch, watching the sun rise over the Wyoming fields. His body is older, slower. His hands still shake when he pours his coffee, but his heart is steadier. Liberty rests her head on his knee. Her eyes are calm, trusting. She has put on weight. Her coat shines in the early light. Frank scratches behind her ears and smiles. A real smile, the kind that reaches his eyes. "I guess we both made it home,"
he says softly. The wind stirs the grass. Birds call out across the fields. Somewhere in the distance, a ranch dog barks. And Frank Donovan, 72 years old, veteran of a war that never really left him, feels something he thought he'd lost. Purpose. Peace. Love. Liberty leans into his hand, and he closes his eyes. They had both been lost in the storm, and somehow they had found each other. If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every week, we bring you true stories of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between those who serve and the animals who save them. Hit that subscribe button and join our family, because some heroes walk on 4 legs, and some carry hearts too big to carry alone. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.